There we go. So we should be live now up on the old YouTube. And it's nice to see the two of you this morning.
Same.
And yeah, Carob and Christine, lovely to chat with you always. And today we had planned to talk. We talked about this prior to the whole affirmative action thing, Supreme Court thing. And then that came up and we were just chatting about that. So it seems like the perfect thing to spend a few moments addressing. And I know, Carob, you posted some stuff on Twitter and have had some pretty detailed thoughts around this. So why don't you just start us off?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll share a little bit of the story. When I was 17, I was really involved in theater. And in my small town, my director came to me and said, well, I recognize that you're talented, but I'm never going to cast you as a leading lady because you are Black, and Moses Lake, the town I'm from, isn't ready for a Black leading lady. So that was the first thing that I heard, and I had to swallow it because
I didn't know you were from Moses Lake. That's
oh my gosh. Sorry about that. Can you still see me? Okay.
Yep.
Yes. Yes. So yes, I'm from Moses Lake, Washington. And so that was the first thing that happened. And then after that happened, I they started a theater program in town, and somebody came to me and they were doing As You Like It, and their Rosalind quit, and he said, I really need you to be Rosalind. So I came and I did the thing, and I was quite talented, I'm not gonna lie. And so I did the thing, and everybody was super excited except for the director. And he openly said, I just don't see Rosalind as a Black woman. And I said, well, I'm what you've got. So that was it. And so I played Rosalind. And when I was out in the park the first night, there was an older man, and he got very angry and stood up and started to make a scene and was like, Shakespeare isn't for Black people. And this is in 96. So having to carry that as a 17-year-old kid in your head while you're just like getting ready to perform, it was pretty heavy. But yeah, I did the show. Yeah, I did the show. And after I did the show, the man came up to me and he said, in that little bit of time, right? So in that 3-hour window, 2.5-hour window, it was able to change his mind. Because he sat with and watched, and at first I'm sure he started off, I'm guessing that his emotions are pretty angry that his wife made him sit and watch. And by the end, he came to me and he said, I'm really sorry. You did an excellent job. And that was something that went onto my, as therapists would say, onto your shelf, right? So that goes onto my shelf of, I can change people's minds just by being better than they expect. So that had been my whole thought. And then with the whole affirmative action and this, I've seen so many plays where like I saw Maria played by a Black woman in The Sound of Music. It made no sense. Like, you're trying too hard. And then I think that I know how it would make me feel. I would feel like, sorry, that's my dog. I would feel like I was only hired because of the color of my skin. And I would stop the way that I had it. I had to accomplish things, and I had to jump over hurdles, and I had to be way more mature and responsible than a kid of 17 should have had to be. So, and yes, I did in one show, because he demoted me in the middle of the show. The girl came back and she wanted her role back, and he demoted me. And so I might have dropped my watering bucket when he made me the watering wench on him. So, because there has to be a time that you fight back. There just has to be. But I think affirmative action is extremely damaging. And the other thing is that they're not looking at merit. I think when it first started, they were taking the very best.
Yes.
And saying, okay, we're going to take the very best and give them an opportunity. And I can agree with that. But that's not what we're doing now. Right now in Utah, there's a group called the Black Menaces. and they are very influential at BYU because they're Black and they said so, you know, and that is not the right use of affirmative action. I can completely see taking two people and measuring them up and going, okay, they have all of these same skills. They're equal in every way. And we have nobody who's of this color. So let's consider them. But even then, you still have to live with knowing, or you think in your head a little less of yourself. Did I get hired just because of this? In fact, when Christine and I did an interview, we had that conversation because she was given a promotion. And I said, do you think that played a part in it, considering the way the Antioch was at the time? So you have that doubt, but then you also know that other people always have that in the back of their head. They are not looking at you as, wow, you must be amazing to be here. They're looking at you as, why did you get this?
I think that's totally true. And I mean, this is maybe a little bit slightly off topic, but you know, we couldn't, at one of the jobs I was at, you know, we had a Black woman who was a receptionist and an administrative assistant. She was always late. She was always kind of not taking it seriously. And then, you know, she said something that was very, I mean, she was like a subordinate. I was a director. And she was saying something to me about, man, and it was all very, you know, oh, you know, Christine, I think you need to get in touch with your anger. And I think you need to, you know, process that. And Christine, I think you need, and she started telling me about these things and then made some kinds of comments about, you know, kind of accusing me in a way, I guess, or misinterpreting. I don't remember specifically. I wish I had a better memory of this, but all I remember thinking is that, okay, I'm going to talk to her boss because it wasn't appropriate to kind of attack me that way in a meeting with other directors, other people. I mean, it was extremely, you know, not even patronizing. I don't even think that's the word. It was just demoralizing me. So I would talk to the boss and the boss says, well, but she's Black. We can't do anything about it.
Wow, just came right out and said
Oh
that.
yeah, there was no, and I took that to the board. I mean, I went pretty far with some of the things that she, you know, and then we had this Latina woman, and she was reporting to me, and I was telling my boss, you know, and she's asked me how she was doing. I said, she's, you know, she's okay, but you know, she's sort of late all the time, and I'm having a hard time getting her to like show up, just to be on time and present. And she goes, Christine, do you think that that's because you have you know, you believe the stereotype that all Latina people show up late to work? I was like, what? You're the one. I think all this is about you, right? So it was very interesting. So because of that, I wasn't able to say anything to her about the lateness. So I was in that environment long before I was actually a professor. And somehow, I mean, in the midst of all of this, you know, critical social justice stuff and leaving and all these different things that have happened since then, I sort of forgot that until this moment, this has been brewing for a very, very long time. There are very many years where there was you can't say that, you don't want to get sued. Oh, gee, if we have two people that are exactly the same, let's pick the person of color, you know, whether that's right or wrong or not, those things are factored in. And so that's been going on forever. I mean, I wasn't even able to write up somebody, you know, who was blatantly disrespectful to me.
I like that you use the term brewing, because
Yes.
that's really what they're doing. They are teaching people to be far more racist. Some of the people who've come out in support of affirmative action or anti the Supreme Court's decision, they do sow that brewing. They do have just a prevalent sense of resentment. They're just I saw Michelle Obama's post, and that one always bothers me because I'm sitting there going, you have a lot of privilege, lady. You have a lot of privilege. And when the privileged people look at the other people and tell them, well, you might as well basically give up, because without these aids, you're never going to succeed.
Yes.
That is
That's
so
really
disgusting.
patronizing. Yeah, and it's interesting what you said, Carob, about the stigma of being basically like a diversity hire or somebody who was
Yeah.
included just because of affirmative action. I don't know if I've ever been in a situation where I've thought about that at all. I've never looked at anybody and thought, you're just here because of this. I mean, maybe teachers at Antioch, actually, now that I think about it, but I've never thought that in a school. Maybe it's because I've never been involved in anything that was super elite, where there was a lot of competition to do
Look,
XYZ.
you know what? I did it. I admitted people because they were people of color. I remember admitting somebody I admitted a Black guy who couldn't spell. I mean, he couldn't put a complete sentence together. I read his essay. I admitted him because he was Black, for sure. And I wanted to show, you know, while I was, I guess somewhat, I don't want to say I was captured. Well, maybe I was captured, but whatever the case, I was trying to be a good little righteous, you know, do the right thing, liberal Democrat. And yes, of course, we need to elevate these people. And I did it many times. He's the one that I remember the most because he was the least qualified out of all of the ones that I admitted that I thought shouldn't have been, but I did because they were not white.
And see, that doesn't elevate anyone.
Nope.
No,
It
because
sure doesn't.
in the end, when they get into a job that they can't
He's gonna
handle,
fail.
well, the thing that really, like, the thing that you said about how it feels to be someone who wonders if they've been stigmatized as a diversity hire or applicant or selection or whatever. I've thought the other side of it is that if you are making a determination about somebody's inclusion just based on one demographic category, you're not looking at all of the aspects of how people come to be in the position that they're in. What are the other setbacks that a person might have experienced? Why are you saying that just based on this one aspect of this person's demographics, do they need a boost? Why is that? You're not looking at the full range. There could be, just like you gave the example of the Obamas, those kids are super wealthy. They don't need a hand up based on race because they've got such a hand up based on wealth already. Class has already given them the position that they're in. And if you make the argument, well, most minorities are, or minorities are more highly represented in the lower income bracket. So if we help minorities, we're helping low income people. Why not just help low income people? Why not base affirmative action on socioeconomic status rather than on race?
It's a good point because I have to say I'm Middle Eastern, and according to the census, I'm required to mark down that I'm Caucasian, by the way, or white when I have a limited option of, demographic information. There's only 4 or 5, options for race or ethnicity. And then I kind of poked around a little bit and come to find that Middle Eastern people or women, Middle Easterners, do not make up a big enough portion to be considered a minority in this country because there's not enough of them to make up what a minority class would be, which would be oppressed and suffers in the wake of the dominant class and the dominant culture and the dominant race.
You're too much of a minority to be a minority.
Correct. What does that even mean? I have no idea. So for me, all of that, so I don't feel that I had been, as a woman maybe, but I didn't benefit in any other real significant way. They don't care to represent my kind or my people is what they're basically saying. They don't care to do that. It's not that important. Right. And so that messed with me a little bit. And I think it was at that moment, and this was when Obama was in office and I didn't like him. I'm already going to just say it. But that was when that started happening, is when I think I became much more hyper aware that this was very problematic, what we were doing here. And what happens to all of the people that are Middle Eastern that have very dark skin and look Black? What about them? They don't get to count. What about the Sudanese? They're not going to get to count. And those people, if you guys are familiar with, that part of the world, you can have a few very, very dark folks that look Black, that have Black hair. Okay. So they don't get to check that box though. Their box is either other, which other means nothing. They just kind of dismiss that, or they have to check the Caucasian box. it's mortifying. I mean, I can't wrap my mind around it even after all this time. We don't represent a group that's significant enough to have been oppressed to have any kind of representation.
So you're saying that even if you do follow the logic of affirmative action, you're leaving people out regardless.
That's intentional.
That's my point.
That's
You're still
completely
leaving people out.
intentional right now. Right now, the goal is to completely eradicate
Yes.
the conservative Christian viewpoint. So you have to go to
Yes.
school and you have to 100% affirm. That was the thing that I was sharing with you guys about Title IX. You have
Yes.
to affirm, you have to celebrate. It's no longer about just acceptance, which I'm fine with. Just
Okay.
acceptance.
Will
right?
you lay that out? I mean, and introduce that idea, because
Yeah.
I didn't know what you were talking about when you first mentioned that earlier.
Okay, sure. So Title IX used to be about, I think it was 27 words.
And it's a sex discrimination. So
right. And
okay.
now they've included gender and anything that's part of the queer community as acceptance. So now what they've done, and there was just a presentation by the NEA of supporting queer kids, Pride thing going on. And what they've done is they've empowered the kids to tattle in 300 pages. There's about 300 pages that they've added to Title IX of all of the ways that you can be discriminated against. So they've made it extremely uncomfortable. So Miguel, is it Cardona? I think it's Cardona, and he is the Secretary of Education. And he just recently said that tolerance is not the end goal. In fact, that's the very bare minimum. We want to celebrate every single day. So if a kid wants to
LGBT?
LGBTQ, yeah.
Okay.
They want to celebrate, and it really is the queer community. So one thing that's very interesting is that the Gay Straight Alliance, which as it used to be called, the GSA, has changed to the Gender and Sexualities Club. So
what? Oh my gosh! So they kept the GS.
They kept it, yes.
Okay, wow.
And so what they did was they started off with, we just want people to be kind and to look out for people bullying, and it's okay to be gay or to be straight. Now, we've seen that on Twitter recently, cis, and it absolutely is a slur at this point. It absolutely is a situation of, you're a het cis person, I don't respect you. We're teaching our children.
Cis?
Heterosexual, cisgender. Yes. And our kids will say this. So our 14-year-olds, more the girls than the boys, but my goodness, if they're attacking you online, that's the first thing that they come for. So they're being taught to hate in the exact same way that Mao taught children to hate, that Stalin taught children to hate. And that is extremely, extremely dangerous.
And you can't overstate that enough, honestly, right? Because people think that that this is a fringe theory, or they think it's some fringe belief system. But when you take a look around at some of the tactics, the goal is the same. The way that they're moving to get to that goal is what's different because of what they have access to and what is available to them now that wasn't 10 years ago, 100 years ago, etc.
And these kids are being celebrated. So there was a girl, and her name was Hildy, and I believe she's an 8th grader. Well, I'm sorry. See, it's already confusing. There is a boy who identifies as a girl whose name is Hildy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And Hildy goes to school, and she said that I have had to report so many people all year. That's like my full-time that's what my education is. And when somebody dead names her, they are sent, and these are 8th grade kids. So if somebody dead names this person, I can't believe this. Like, I had these principles of I'm not going to use pronouns. I'm not going to do these things. But when you're looking at Hildy reminds me of Veruca Salt.
Yeah,
big giant curls and very much like
God.
And she talks to the principal, and she's like, "Well, I don't respect any hit cis man. But he's pretty cool." And so, like, whenever somebody does something to me, they get in school detention, and I just walk up to him and give him a high five.
Don't you remember when else they were telling you to report? They're telling you to report on people that weren't vaccinated. Yes. They were telling you to report on your parents if they were not being inclusive of whatever. That is very similar to what was happening to the Jews.
Yes.
During World War II or prior to, and when
Well,
the
in
Holocaust.
China,
Mhm.
the kids would report so much that there's a story on YouTube about a young man who reported on his parents and thought he did the right thing. And
Yep,
they walked his mom in front of him and shot
I
her,
heard this one. That one I
shot
actually
her
heard.
in front of them.
Yes.
Now let's look at, I wish I had pictures of it, but if we look at some of the memes that our kids are seeing, they're
Yep.
seeing the one with the lighter, the one with the lighter that says burn the system down.
Oh, wow.
They are
Very
seeing,
aggressive.
there's this one that I saw recently because I've got a teenager. And so the meme says, we can get along or we can disagree and still be friends does not apply to. And then it has a list of all of the things it doesn't apply to. So it doesn't apply to if you're a homophobe, if you're a Christian, if you're transphobe, if you're any of these things, we cannot still get along. So we're literally teaching our children that intolerance is completely acceptable if people don't agree with you.
Mhm.
That is what we're teaching our kids.
Christian is on that list. I'm still stuck on that.
So, yes. So here's the thing. If you are a postmodern Christian, if you are a Christian who uses the name of Christ, but the Bible is uncomfortable for you,
Yeah.
then you're okay. But
Hmm.
if you are a Christian who follows biblical principles, it's absolutely okay to hate you. And so there's another one that's
This
like an
is
anime.
comical.
Yeah, well, there's an anime where this young girl is pushing another girl in a wheelchair, and she pushes her off a cliff. And this is supposed to be cute. So our children are learning, they are being inundated with propaganda. I was just in DC last week, and so many of the museums are captured. So you go to the museum.
Showed us, Carrie,
Yeah.
you should maybe share a bit about that, because that was horrifying. These are museums that are capturing, American history. So this is being written in the history books. This is documented. This is part of the permanent record of our country going forward. And what you found, can you just tell us about that for just a second? Because
yeah, well, one of them was
when I saw
in the transportation room of the Museum of History. It's trains and cars and everything, but then the big mural on the outside says protect trans rights, and trans sort of it talks about boys in the girls' bathrooms, that nobody should feel uncomfortable
Wait, at
using
the
restroom.
transportation
At the
museum?
transportation. So
So
they
they're,
changed it
oh
to
gosh.
transportation.
Yep.
Or there's a room that is fully about protecting our democracy. And it talks about, for kids, it talks about how important it is to vote for somebody who looks like you or who shares your gender. So this is thousands of kids going in, and they're only hearing one point of view.
Didn't they also have something about MAGA in there?
So that was, yes.
Terrorist group, right?
So that was an
Crazy.
child. They had a competition, and the kids did their tri-board reports like they always do. And this girl did how MAGA and Hitler are the same. So fascism.
Oh, okay.
And so it had the MAGA hat, but she was chosen out of her state. She was from New Mexico, and she was chosen out of her state. And my husband just walked up to her and said, this is an opinion rather than a fact, right? And she goes, I get my facts from approved sources. And he tried to talk to her, and she said, look, I don't have to listen to you just because you're a heterosexual man who's older than me. This is the way our kids are talking. This is what they are being taught and being empowered to do.
I have to tell you, I don't have children, and that's something that, was important to me at one point in my life, but there is a big sense of relief I have for having kids that aren't in school, because I couldn't actually put them in school. They would be homeschooled if I had children that were school aged at this point in my life, if I had the means to do that, because the toxicity, the poison, these kids are going to be the decision makers coming up here in the next couple of decades. So what is that going to look like for everybody else? So that's why, without kids, I have focused on kids so much as I have, even though I don't have any of my own, because I do believe that these, I don't believe it. It's the truth. These are the people that are going to be running this country.
And this is the main focus of our schools. So our schools are lying and they're saying that school looks the same as it did 30 years ago. And of course they're doing that because I believe it was, I am afraid to say the number, but I know it was billions of dollars in pre-K education. And it came in through relief funds. So then there's the ESSA and other things that have come in that are, the resources are specifically to get children to follow this new queering of, and there are posters in schools.
Well,
that say the future
and I
is
was
here.
just having this conversation. I was a part of this discussion with a parent who is trying to decide whether to pull his kids out of school or try to work with the school and fight back against some of the stuff in the school. And part of his logic was that he feels like he can counter this stuff at home because he's very aware of it and is able to keep a good dialogue with his own kids. So he's able to keep them from being, he thinks he's able to balance the indoctrination. And what I'm thinking is, but they're still going to school every day with a cohort of people who, even if you are able to keep their minds open, they're going to be very influenced by their peers, and their peer set is going to be very influenced by all of this. And do you really want your kids growing up with that cohort? Or is it better that we need to purge our kids from these schools? We need to pull all of our kids out of these schools.
I think it's true because I'll tell you, my sister's a teacher. I've mentioned this before. And, this stuff didn't really, she lives in a very conservative area, and it's, Devin Nunez's old district, right? So everybody there is extremely, and it's like 45% Latino. Okay. Very conservative group. So, she said to me the other day, she said, "Thank God, I am relieved that my kids made it through the K through 12, the last one's going on to his senior year. And they escaped, and they're pretty well knowledge, there's the eldest my nephew has some pretty good knowledge about what all of this is and what it means and why it's problematic. And she was saying that to me the other day. And the funny thing about that is, 2 years ago, she was also saying this stuff will never hit our county. We're protected. We're safe. It's super conservative. We're okay. We're going to be fine. And now she knows what she doesn't even know all the details. She knows scratching the surface here. And now it's like the fury and the anger. And it's like, well, this is what I've been telling you for 2 years. Nowhere is safe. Nowhere. So yes, get your kids through the school. They're done. That's fabulous. But if they weren't, and they were early on in, nowhere is safe. Where are you going to put them? Well, I don't think you can put them anywhere other than at home. I mean,
well, and we think that, as you said, Carob, it has gotten a lot worse. Schools are not the way that they were 30 years ago, but this has been going on for longer than I realized. When I started talking with my younger daughter, she's 25 now. I started talking with her about some of these issues, fairly recently. And like, how much did you experience this when you were in school? They got the genderbread man. She's 25. Wow. They got the genderbread man when she was in high school. That's like 10 years ago, right? That was going on then. I didn't know that.
It was. I mean, I think 20, 30 years, probably 30 years is probably accurate.
But
when did they start with this stuff? I mean, the really hard push for this gender propaganda.
Well, last night I was at a meeting, and there was a woman who just retired from school because she refuses to teach this. And next month, all I'm doing is featuring people who have, just featuring people with homeschool, all the different ways. And she's one of the people that I want to talk to. One of the things that she said was that she recognized it. Her son is an adult now, and she recognized it. So she pulled him out of school. And one of the most important things that we have to do if we choose to homeschool is teach our kids both sides. So the other day I was in a bookstore and I picked up Marx's essays, because the thing is that if we don't teach our kids, if we don't teach them about race, if we don't teach them about Marxism, if we don't teach them about the 1619 Project, somebody else will. And then they will say, see, your parents are bigoted and backwards, and that's why you don't know. So
that's a good point.
And there's no way that in the 6 hours of school that a child is going to get both sides of the story.
No.
There's just none.
Mhm.
They can't do it, and they don't want to. They
So
want our
the
kids
parent
to be
has to
stupid.
do, so that, and that's something that I've said, I think before, that, well, if you can't pull your kids out, then maybe what you do is a counteract type of thing, where they learn all that junk at school. Fine. You come home and then you do okay, here's another point of view or way of looking at it. And you
Mhm.
try to do it in pods where you have groups of kids than just one. I think that pressure to belong and to have kind of a dissenting opinion or viewpoint is too much to bear for some children at a certain age, which is
Oh,
quite
yeah.
normal
Mhm.
developmentally, actually.
Mhm.
So you look at it and say, okay, you have a bunch of kids then, and you form a pod of these kids, a group, where then they don't feel that they're alone, that they know that there are other kids who believe
Mhm.
that. And perhaps they can even have conversations out on the schoolyard with some of the other kids who aren't in their pod. And that might be something that isn't so threatening, but can be very educational. That's where I think that you can do, if you can do both.
We're doing a Socratic seminar. So we're going to do history that is teaching people to be patriotic, but also that digs in. So my son, he's very interested in spies and espionage and things like that. And so he's going to play Nathan Hale for 3 days at a festival.
Oh, wow.
But then because and he has to write the whole 20-minute presentation, and has to really like find all the facts. And so my idea was, well, I'll start a history fair. I'll get as many teenagers as I can to learn about whoever they want to in history, but they have to know about both parts. So if they think that, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is wonderful, okay, what did she believe? What was everything that she believed? And now you have to debate George Washington and have this conversation with them. And how can we make this fun, engaging? Because the kids have to buy in. But then when I was talking to this group of kids about it, they got so excited that they started like making lists of friends that they could invite. And then I'm thinking, well, we do it after school so that the kids who are normally in school till 3 o'clock can come. And then if we create something so wonderful that this is how we win. We win only by changing the culture.
Mhm.
So
that's that's such a beautiful idea. It's so creative and engaging. I love that. And I think, I think you said this to us before, Carrie, too, offline, is that we have to replace, we've got to replace this with something. It can't just be us saying, okay, this is wrong, not the way to go, etc. We need to have a replacement and something that actually works.
We have to have
to take its
solutions that are so
place,
much better.
solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to read 2 comments. One, Gin Bottle says, Leslie, it started to explode in about 1970. It reached various watersheds in the ensuing years. And that, when I look back over, and I agree that the groundwork was being laid, but also there has been a sharp escalation. And that's what I'm wondering about, is when did this escalate? Because all the 3 of us, we're all about the same age. We're all mid-40s.
Yep.
And this wasn't, sex ed when I was a kid was totally different than this. We had some discussions about tolerance probably, but I don't remember that being involved in sex ed at all. There was the general tone of being taught to socialize and be around other people, but there wasn't anything specific about
it was
this.
Obama's term that started to throw this off the edge, off the cliff. I think that his presidency created so much racial division. It was one of that to me, okay, and I'm not a historian, so I'm just going to speak as a layperson, then my experience was that the power of race, or the racial wars, the race wars, the identity wars, were fueled by his administration. Things that were going on that were so divisive, right? And how did he get there? Well, he was installed obviously by the cult party of the Democrat. Excuse me, sorry for anybody that's Democrat. It's fine. But what I'm trying to say is that that's where I think that came in. That's very much an agenda. And I think when he came into office and was supposed to unify, the division grew. Then you want to throw Trump into the mix after that, then that sparked an even bigger divide, not because Trump did or didn't do something or not. It was because how he was framed and looked at by this group of people that were already on fire about all of these culture, all of these race wars that were going on, and felt completely justified to say, hell no, I'm going to dismantle the system. So in my opinion, I would say around 2012, 2011. Okay. And then I think it went over the cliff in 2016. That's where I think it was on fire, and it was fast, and it was hard. And I do believe that it was political. All of this is politically based anyhow. And I do believe that it started with Obama's administration injecting hate into the system in a way that I had never experienced before. I don't feel that it was this way with the Clinton family.
So that would have been what,
criminals.
2008.
Yeah. And then they're criminals, or the Clintons are criminals. I'm not going to sit here and defend them, but where if we're talking about where I felt it actually go over the edge, that's what I would say. Because even when 9/11 happened in 2001, to me, there was an anti-Middle Eastern sentiment, anti-Muslim sentiment, I guess you could say, for sure. But there was more of a coming together. I remember these vigils that they were having all over Los Angeles, of all places, that were, to honor the firefighters and the cops and the people who went and were trying to, the military, the people who are going in there and trying to save and help and all this kind of stuff. And there was a sense of unity where we kind of all came together on this common enemy, which wasn't about being a certain color. It was about a radical way of thinking. I mean, I'm not naive enough to think that they didn't have their own reasons for invading, Afghanistan and Iraq. I understand that. But I think culturally, if we're looking at our society, that felt more unifying than it did divisive. So cut to 2008, maybe, wherever that jump was, that was, in my opinion, that incoming administration, right? Wasn't Obama after that? I think so.
Yeah.
It was 2008.
Yeah, 2008. So, okay.
Well, that's interesting. That's where you started to feel it.
Correct.
And I guess there's lots of analysis that could be done on how, and there has been lots of good analysis. Somebody mentioned James Lindsay. There's lots of people who are talking about where exactly and who and how this was orchestrated. But I guess what I'm most interested in is when you started to feel it, when it started to become, above the lineman and
like super palpable.
Really,
yeah.
So I have two things. One, in the 1930s, for the African Americans, social justice replaced biblical justice. So it was always brewing. And the church that Barack Obama went to, famously, the pastor said, "Not God bless America, God damn America."
Oh, for God's sake.
So that's a lot of people who believe that, and that's kind of what we're living now. But in the early 2000s, I worked for a theater company, and we went to schools and taught children to protect themselves from sexual abuse. And we had a very clear, we were taught by a police officer the way in which to approach it that did not suggest sexual things to children. But at the same time, it would say, this person wants to look at pictures in this book with you, and it has naked people in it. And we had to say those very specific words. We couldn't say what they were doing, nothing else. And then you were just supposed to say, no, get away to a safe place. Okay. Today, those books, way worse than those books that depict an older man walking with a younger man in photos, are in our schools. So something drastically changed there. And I do think that Obama played a part, but I also think that Obama coming into office, yes, he was already fueled by the ideas of his church, the ideas that are rampant today. But it also brought to the forefront people who were racist on both sides.
Yes.
You had people who had low expectations, and then you had people who absolutely did not want a Black president.
Yes.
I remember saying I would be fine with a Black president if these were not his values.
Yes.
But for me, his values, and that's what I always tell people, I don't vote based on color, nor do I vote on what's between their legs. Neither one of those things matter to me in whether or not somebody, like, who has my values, who wants to lift people up instead of pass out cell phones and tell them that they're victims.
That's what I couldn't stand about him. Also, there was a moment there where I said, okay, we're electing a Black president. This is a huge leap forward. Okay, so let me give this a chance. Okay, let's see what can happen here that can actually be good. And then I found that the only thing that came out of it was the free cell. And I was working with the homeless at this time. So the free cell phones and the free, you know, whatever it was you mentioned, Carrie, that they were handing out at the time. But the division that was that part to me. And then I started to see that Obamacare came along, and who did Obamacare help? I ended up with thousands of dollars in medical debts, which I've had for so many years, which, by the way, I was a full-time gainfully employed working 2 jobs, right? So I had a private practice and I did a day job full-time. There were points in time where I had 3 and I could barely afford my own medical bills. I saw the writing on the wall as to why this was happening, who was being pulled up, who was being pulled down, and the reason for it. And it was very clear that the erasing of the middle class has been a dream, you know, of the globalist agenda, which is infiltrating here for decades ago. I mean, we stopped saying God in the Pledge of Allegiance. I think we didn't at my school, because I went to a Catholic school, but the public schools in the Bay Area stopped using God in the Pledge of Allegiance in the 80s. It was, no, we need to separate, you know, church and state kind of thing. But it wasn't the word God in the Pledge of Allegiance that was going to be the problem. that wasn't going to solve anything, but it was making a statement that was very bold and very much telling you exactly where we were going to go next. And that was, I think, a bit scary. But I don't think I understood, and I didn't have the savvy enough to know that back then. I just knew as a child it was wrong. To me, it felt wrong. Why would we do this with our flag and our country when this is supposed to be something we're proud of? And now we're not saying it at all, or we're taking out those words. Again, at a Catholic school, no, we handled the flag in a certain way. We folded it the way it was supposed to be folded. And it was a great honor to be chosen to actually put the flag up for the school day and take it down. And so we had a different experience, but my little friends that were at the public schools had a very different feeling about all that. So it was a kind of interesting moment where I saw something happening when I was a kid. But as an adult, okay, that's kind of where I felt that the divides came. I never felt part of this country, if that makes sense. When Obama was in office, I did not feel, this sounds so personal and kind of cheeseball, but I'm just going to say it. I didn't feel that I was included in this group of citizens that were supposed to be American loving and care about our country. I didn't feel like I didn't feel that was for me. I felt like I was in some way an enemy of the state in the way in which it was presented. Now, is that an intuitive feeling I got, or what was it? Something like that, but maybe it was actually what he was saying directly. So yeah, it was thrilling to have a Black president, and I thought that was a great leap forward. But when the agenda was presented, then to me, it was just this, it was just pushing forward something else. Now you have a Black person that's pushing forward, trying to capture the minorities and the Blacks to come on board with whatever the agenda was, just for the fact that he's Black and the fact that,
right.
I had such rose-colored glasses on about Obama. I had a different experience with the Bush years, and I really didn't. The whole 9/11 thing, and the way that was being, the way that it was clearly benefiting some really significant moneyed interests. The whole thing stunk to high heaven to me. I couldn't stand Bush, and I thought the way that we went into that war was horrifying to me. And that was kind of a big political wake-up call to me in my early 20s. And when Obama came up around, I really had rose-colored glasses. All he was the opposite of Bush, and I was delighted and thrilled. And it took a long time to see that there were some significant problems with his presidency. And I think for me, it was the drone strikes was really when I started to wake up to that. But I didn't see the social stuff. Even then, I still didn't see the social stuff.
See, I had people who
came up during his time. That was the
Patriot Act was before that. It was Bush.
Yeah.
Oh, it was Bush. The spying on the cell phones, was that Bush or was that Obama? Where they started to be able to have access. That was Bush. I think you're right, because that was the way we were going to fight terrorism, quote unquote. Right.
I had people who would come to me, or they would send me messages, and they would say, "I'm voting with you in mind." So
what does that mean?
You know, because Obama and I were both mixed race.
Right.
And so people thought, you know, oh, I'm voting with you in mind. And I'm like, this is kind of disgusting. Like, I don't want to be seen like the second that you think of somebody, you think of me, oh, because I've got this one friend and she's of color. that is not how I want to be seen. And at first, when I first heard Obama speak, I thought, wow, this is amazing. And then immediately I heard this, I heard the division. And I've always wanted, it was the same thing. Okay, this is cheesy, but like my nemesis, my fake nemesis is Meghan Markle. Oh, and I always just like wanted these people to do amazing things and be wonderful people and to unite us, because I look at the world and I see white people and I see Black people and I just see people. So I'm like, can we just like, if anybody should have an acceptance and be able to see that people on either side of the fence are good or bad, or all of us are a little bit of all of it, it should be these people. So they should be able to unite us. And it is always, always, always the white man keeping me down. And I'm
can't unite us.
You live in Martha's Vineyard and you live in a palace.
That's right.
So
they unite us. There's too much
man.
money to be made in keeping the division. It's like you said, Leslie, what was the whole purpose of invading? The purpose of invading, oh, they have weapons of mass destruction. Then they find that there's absolutely nothing. It's because they wanted to take out Saddam Hussein for whatever. And wars make people very, very wealthy, and they make countries very, very wealthy. We made killings off of funding both sides of every war that we've ever been a part of.
Somebody did. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, contractors and all of this kind of shit and stuff. And we end up funding, but so I think it took me a long time to realize that that's actually not what they want for us. They actually don't want a cohesive and peaceful and prosperity for the people, because they don't win in that scenario. You don't become a multi-billionaire. There were, I think, more billionaires made in 2021, I guess, the COVID year, 2020, 2021, than there were in the entire world altogether. There were more billionaires made off of that. Well, let's look at where the funds came from. Who ended up making money off all those masks that got sent everywhere? Who ended up making the big box stores that were making a killing, taking away profits from small mom and pop shops that were unessential or what non-essential? So, I mean, all of these crises are ways to make people wealthy. And I think that is the piece of it that's been the missing puzzle for me this entire time, is that was the motivation all along. You look behind the curtain and it's like, oh, wow, now all of these people are lining their pockets. We have to keep funding wars. We have to keep getting involved in conflict and chaos. We have to start culture wars and identity wars. When I was I had a Black studies professor when I was at UC Santa Barbara. Those were my first 2 years of college. And then I went to USC, which, interestingly enough, Carob, back to kind of something you said earlier, at USC, I was told I would never be an anchor on television, which is what I wanted as a journalist, because of the color of my skin and because I had curly hair. I needed to straighten it and try to look more white, quote unquote. Wow. Fascinating. So I dropped my major because of that. That I couldn't stand. You need to look more white. You need to straighten. I ended up straightening my hair later in life anyway, but that at that time, right? So interestingly enough, that was an experience I had that heavily weighed on my decision and changed the course of the things I did. And I lost my train of thought now about what I was saying.
You were saying at UC Santa Barbara, your Black
my Black studies professor said, we talked about the 20s and the 1910s even, and he was really the only Black professor I've ever had, or professor that other than anything other than white, that ever said the real war, the real division was between the poor and the working class poor and the the elites. And when you saw that the working class poor whites and the working class poor Blacks started to unite and rise up against the establishment and against the institution, they needed to infuse something to separate them. So that's where you have, it doesn't matter that you're poor and white, you're still better because you're not Black. So that when that group had become so powerful,
pitting them against each other, because if they unite, that's when.
So that's what they mean to do. They never mean to actually unite you. They never mean to have they mean to consolidate power. They mean to increase their own wealth, and they mean to continue to keep us in conflict, because that's where people become very wealthy. And I honestly, that was very eye-opening. And that I
was
learned
a
in
strategy
1997.
That was used very effectively in the antebellum period.
Yes.
In the South, to pit poor whites and poor Blacks against each other.
Yes.
Mhm.
And you saw these amazing photos that he would pull out where you'd just see these guys that were working these, kind of working class jobs, and whites and blacks, and they were all together hanging out, eating lunch and
Mhm.
chatting and smoking and whatever they were doing. And there was some just beautiful, you just saw that, and you could just see them laughing and kind of connecting in these photos, a still picture, that still is marked in my mind. I still remember what it looked like, because that was the first time that I had anybody who was educated enough to be able to say to us straight up, listen, this is all completely injected into the system purposefully.
Mhm.
But I think you have to be careful with that, because then we get into Marx's original ideas,
Sure,
right? So we can get into this,
sure.
because it is true. It is true that the problem is class. It is true that we could solve the problems supposedly, of going into our schools and only keeping the elites educated or whatever else, by looking at class and by looking at income.
Yes.
So we have to be careful that we don't feed into that other part of Marxist
Yes.
narrative,
Yes.
which is always to resent,
Mhm.
always to hate, and
Yes.
ultimately to destroy and eradicate other people.
Yes.
Like, if we're going to move forward in solutions, then we need to go all the way back to the beginning of the conversation. We need to go, here are these people, they are equally compatible in all of these areas. Now we can look at something else.
Yes.
Now we can look at another aspect of who they are, to make sure that we're being more equal, more fair, and inviting and bringing these solutions.
Yes.
But when we go to the bottom of the barrel, when we select people who cannot read or write and put them at Harvard, and then worse, we graduate them because we need those numbers. So then they're going out into the professional field, and who knows what they're doing. But I do not want a doctor who is hired solely based on the color of their skin or their gender working on me.
What
I
about
do not
United
care if I have a gay
Airlines?
doctor.
Correct.
I just don't want somebody who's solely brought in for those reasons.
Well, United Airlines made a commitment to hire 50% of all the new pilots were going to be Black women. It had nothing to do with what they did in flight. It
Wow.
reminds me of that. Do I want somebody who got a C-, okay, in flight school,
Right.
flying me because she's a
Oh,
Black
thank you.
woman? Or do I want a white male who's an asshole, who's a big jerk, but he knows how to fly the plane? Give me the jerk who knows how to fly the plane, because I don't need to be your friend. I need you to get me from point A to point B. So I really don't care about that. Now, if
Right.
you're a jerk and you're my doctor, that's a different story. That's a different purpose. But we can't, this whole lumping everything together is sort of completely, it's a problem. It's a major problem. Do I want somebody who is going to be a jerk, who is my therapist? No. Do I want somebody who's my therapist, who has empathy? And even if they're less educated than a psychologist in their master's level, well, I might be biased. I'm a master's level. That's fine with me too, because I think that they can be wonderful. So again, it's sort of like, do you care whether your pilot is a Black woman because you're seeing Black women flying, or do you care that you make it to your location safely? Do you care that somebody has a doctorate, or do you care that they have more compassion and they understand you and they have, a master's and they're your therapist? So all of this has to be put in some kind of a context, and it's not. It's
Right.
these sweeping overall kind of policies, this umbrella, that's a huge problem, because none of us want a doctor who barely eked through medical school, work, as a neurosurgeon, working on your brain. I went to some of the most egotistical doctors you've ever seen in your life to have neck surgery, and I've had 4. Let me tell you, I paid out of pocket. They were out of my insurance network, and I did it for a reason. And they were all big, whats. Okay. They all thought they were just smarter than God, and they'd look at their work and they'd think how brilliant it was. And they'd admire the x-ray photos afterwards and say, look at the beautiful work, Christine, this is art. It's art. And I'd say, you know what? Thank you. Have a nice day. I'm glad it's all done. Do I want to be your best friend? No. Would I date you? No. Would I want you to be? But do I want you working on my neck and working on my brain? Yes, because you're one of the best in the country. So there we go again, right? With what is important and what matters. That matters to me more than having a really super kind, nice doctor who's working on something that's very sensitive in my body.
Mhm.
And they were only hired because they're black or they're whatever color they are.
Yes.
So the
Trans,
argument for
gay.
merit over
There you go.
inclusivity. Yeah.
There you go.
Yes.
Merit over inclusivity. I think
It's a good
that's
argument.
that's the perfect way to say it.
One,
Merit over inclusivity.
not to derail, but this is kind of a non sequitur, but I wanted to go back to one thing before, because I know we have to wrap up really soon. There was one more comment that I wanted to read out since we were on the topic of education
Yes.
and children in schools. And
Yes.
Jim Moses said, "My teenagers laugh at all this woke BS and mock anyone in their class. Call them a Karen if they embrace the woke nonsense. I'm heartened hearing them speak about it. They smell the BS." And I kind of just wanted to address that, because that's one of the things that I've wondered is, when are kids going to get to the point where they see this being fed to them? Kids have a rebellious instinct, and it's part differentiation, and rebelling against the status quo is a part of development. And so at some point, are we going to get a new red guard? Are we going to have the rainbow guard, as you say,
Yeah.
Carob? Or are we going to see kids start to push back? And
Okay, so
what's that going to look like?
So this is huge, and you have to realize that this is what's going on. The Title IX protections are going to target those kids. It is absolutely a fact that most kids, most boys for sure, recognize that this is a bunch of garbage. Most boys and a lot of girls, including a lot of gay and lesbian kids. They're like, we're being used and we don't like it. Title IX, though, is going to change that. Kids can go to detention. I've recently interviewed a father whose son went to detention because somebody accused them of doing something, even though there's literally no proof of the person doing it. That detention is in school, and then they are made to watch training videos on why they need to respect pronouns, why they need to do this. So while the kids may laugh and call it BS and behind closed doors, it takes one infiltrator in your group. And that's the thing, is these kids are being taught to be little activists.
Well, that's interesting, because that seems like that could directly ignite the rebellious spirit against this in a way. I mean, you start to push back against someone and you're going to create more resistance.
But when your child gets a record for it, which is what here in Utah, we have one school that was taken over by the Department of Justice, or one district. And so when your kid gets a record,
the DOJ?
The DOJ runs Davis County in Utah.
They're the most corrupt letter agency we have.
So here's
FBI,
the thing. When I say they're targets, they are targets. And so knowing who I am and what I do, I really truly felt like it was not safe for my son to go into school, because he will have a target on his back, and they are absolutely targeting Christian kids. And if you dead name somebody, or if you say, you know what, no, thank you, that can see a kid with like an honor roll kid who's never gotten in trouble, who just says, no, thank you, I don't believe in that. That can see that child having to have mandated therapy.
With Title IX.
So keep
their
your rebellion.
Protections are removed, basically. They have no protections anymore.
Yes. The protections are only for the queer kids, which will make some kids. There's a story about a young woman who she said, you know what, no, thank you. And she was so bullied that now she's the one transitioning. And that is here in my county, because she just wanted to make it stop. And teachers are empowered to say, you know, I will only have kindness in my class, but that kindness does not go in every direction. So I almost wonder if conservative Christian kids should start wearing a cross on their, kind of the way they wore a star, and go into school and use what was done in history and just say, this is what you're doing to us. You are so discriminating against us. But I do believe that at home, you let your kid be as, you know, absolutely, this is a bunch of garbage as possible, because they've got to hold on to their sanity.
Do you know what's interesting is that I actually earlier was listening to a podcast, and somebody came on and brought sort of this chart that showed that as time goes on, people that were Christian and followed kind of the Bible's principles, right? So it's what you were saying earlier, Carob, it's not just about being Christian, but actually following kind of what the Bible had to say. And so there's this line going this way, and this line under here was like the quality of society in general. And as the people devolved into madness and chaos, right, they tended to get further and further and further away from the Bible, which is the one which was this consistent, stable line kind of on this graph that showed that if you continue to follow it, you typically stayed right over here. You know, society typically stayed in some space. Not to say that everybody believes in it or should or not, but we're talking about not bullying people for it, not blaming, not arresting people for it, not, you know, punishing them for it, but literally just allowing people to do that. And then you see this sharp decline when we stop doing that and we become further away from some of those foundational principles. Anyway, I found it very fascinating this morning because I hadn't really considered that the Bible portion was what was under attack in such a major way, nor did I really think about the Bible portion as being anchoring in some fashion, some of the values, let's say, not the religion, but the values of what it brings, being very anchoring for society. I didn't really think about that. I have in other ways, family values, but I haven't thought about that particular part of it, which is, you know, controversial, I suppose, but the Bible or readings or teachings, right.
It seems like there's a lot there to discuss, and a lot of variables involved in that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So yeah, that's really interesting though.
I think the last thing is I noticed that Kamala, whichever, had said some things about them being the party of love, them being the party of tolerance.
Oh gosh.
And all of these.
How can they even say that at this point?
Exactly. Because they're saying that, you know, we will stand up for all of these things. And that is what, if you just watch CNN, that's what you believe. But I believe it's loving to tell the truth. I do. And to tell it in love. But like, you know, if somebody is anorexic, you don't tell them they look beautiful and healthy and keep doing what they're doing. But I also believe that you don't attack anyone. You just don't. But standing up for yourself and not complying is not attacking someone. But when the Democratic Party or the Democrat Party says that they're going to come after anyone who doesn't agree with them under the name of tolerance, then we're in a lot of trouble. And that is a misdirection, misinformation, whatever you want to call it. But our children, they are absolutely on the front lines. And the other thing is that this very much lures them into it because this is the way to be popular and protected in school.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's not this isn't tolerating or loving people despite or accepting their differences from some social norm. This is absolutely a system of creating and incentivizing that
Rainbow
change. I mean, like the curriculum, I still keep coming back to that. The parent that came on and showed me a bunch of curriculum that their kids were being taught in school, and it's just chock full of trying to incite a certain feeling in the kids. Try on these identities, and then also let's read these vignettes where kids are getting discriminated. How do you feel about that? Don't you want to go and protect the child who's experiencing discrimination? And they're all hypotheticals that are being suggested in order to get a sense of indignation and a sense of righteous allyship out of these children. So you're trying to create this feeling, and then you're trying to incentivize children with answers and responses that push them towards adopting these identities, because that's what gets them praise. And then if we're doing all that behind the scenes, and then over here on this other side, we're saying, well, we just want to be loving and tolerant and accepting of these things. Well, you're creating the very system. So it's this giant farce. That's I don't know. Anyway.
No, I know it is. It is. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks
What's
for
the way out.
What's the way out? Yeah, conversations.
I think, my gosh.
Yes. I think uncovering what's going on is the way out. Like having real conversations about it, and just
Yep.
You know, people are so afraid to be called these names like transphobe or white
Yes.
supremacist. These words don't mean anything anymore because they're just launched at anybody who has any dissenting opinion. It's like, here's the right way to be, and then everything else is what far right, transphobic, white supremacist. It's the narrowing of the accept. It's like that list of
Yes.
it's okay to disagree, or you can still be friends if you have a disagreement, unless it's about all of these things, which is
Right.
basically everything in life. You know, you have to align perfectly, or you're alt-right, white supremacist, transphobic.
And I don't have a problem telling people anymore the truth about why I stopped teaching. I used to be very afraid when people would ask me and come up with some, different answers that were true, but were not the main reason. Somebody asked me at the airport the other day, oh, we found out, I was talking to some people on the same plane that they live close by. Oh, so you were teaching, and they were both therapists themselves. Why did you stop? And I said, because it's too woke and I can't hang with that. The whole profession is inside and out and upside down. And I wasn't going to do that anymore. Don't even care who heard me. Don't even care who was sitting right. At this point, I've become very comfortable with just saying it how it is.
Good.
And I'm finding more often than not that people agree, not disagree. This teeny little loud bunch drowns them out.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really great. Just being able to just say it, just speak it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not hateful to have a disagreement with, a particular ideology.
Mm-hmm.
A nuanced take is not hateful. There's nothing bigoted about
grow
that.
from it. Sometimes you'll hear something and you'll go, okay, that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can accept that piece of it.
Yes.
Usually with the woke, that's not the way I feel, but sometimes you can at least like JFK, you can say things and hear things and you can go, okay, well, I can understand that point, but I absolutely don't understand that. So.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Well, ladies, thank you so much for this great chat, and thanks to everybody who joined us in the chat online, and we'll do this again soon.
Sounds great.